What's up, everybody? Today I am here to do a ranking of all of the Mummy stories within the Goosebumps franchise, including the two Mummy episodes that are part of the Goosebumps TV show, for a total of 11 stories in here. So yeah, there's quite a few episodes or stories within the Goosebumps franchise that have to do with mummies, and there are also various appearances of mummies as monsters in like various other give yourself like Goosebumps books and stories that R.L. Stine wrote, but we're just going to be doing like the main mummy stories in this ranking. And as usual, we will be going from worst to best. And yeah, let's just jump right into it. So, at the very bottom, coming in at number 11 on my ranking, and I will just say that this is the only mummy story that I find to be bad, like outright bad. For the most part, I think R.L. Stine nails mummy stories. He's pretty consistent with these. And this is a subgenre, a topic that I'm not even typically like a huge fan of. I don't really seek out mummy type stories that often, apart from like Goosebumps type stuff. Yeah, it's not something I typically a big fan of, but R.L. Stine seems to be pretty consistent with this type of story. So that's good. We only have one bad one. So at the very bottom, at number 11, we have The Return of the Mummy episode. And this is a DVD here that has 3 episodes from the Goosebumps TV show. It has Return of the Mummy, Don't Wake Mummy episode, which we will be talking about later on, and then You Can't Scare Me. So yeah, The Return of the Mummy episode, I don't think this is very good at all. It has terrible effects. The acting is not very good. Yeah. I don't care for this episode. This is probably one of my least favorite episodes of the Goosebumps TV show. I just don't think it's very good. I gave it a flat 2 out of 5 stars. It's not quite terrible. It's not the worst episode of the Goosebumps TV show, but yeah, I don't care for it very much. It's the only mummy story within this franchise that I would consider bad. Yeah, that's the Mummy Returns episode, or the Return of the Mummy episode. Okay, coming in at number 10 on my ranking is The Mummy with My Face, which is the last short story in this triple header, book 2. And The Mummy with My Face is a story that's I don't really care for this either a whole lot, to be honest, but this is like a significant step up from the Return of the Mummy episode. Like from here on out, most of these are at least like okay, decent, to good, and so on. But yeah, this is just like a short 30-page short story. Each of these triple header books have 3 short stories in them that are like 30 to like 40 pages long each. And it has kind of a cool concept, but the execution just fell very flat in my opinion, and I didn't care for like the final twist at the end. And I reread this short story like somewhat recently. I think like a month or 2 ago. Like I was kind of going through and rereading all of the mummy stories to like jog my memory on them before I did this ranking. And I've already forgotten some of this short story, even though I just read it not that long ago. So I don't know if that just means that the story is really bland and forgettable, or if my memory sucks. Maybe a little bit of both. So yeah, The Mummy with My Face, 2.5 out of 5 stars. That comes in at number 10 on my ranking. Okay, coming in at number 9 on my ranking, and this one might be a little bit of a hot take and might tick off some fellow Goosebumps fans. But coming in at number 9 is The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, book number 5 in the original 62 series and the very first mummy story within this franchise. And I'll be honest, I did kind of skim through this book again to jog my memory on it a little bit before I did this ranking. And back when I read through the original 62 series, like 4 or 5 years ago now, however long that was, I gave this book like a 2 out of 5. I did not care for it, and I've never really liked these mummy books, even when I was a kid. But after kind of like skimming through it again and refreshing my memory on some of the things and the plot elements and stuff that happens in here, I think I was a little bit too harsh on it. I don't think it's quite that bad. I did give it a 2.5 out of 5 stars as well. But the whole first half of this book, like the first 2/3 of it actually, it's just so meandering. It's just the kids being annoying and pulling pranks on one another. There's really not a lot that happens. It's not very eventful. You get a lot of the stereotypical stuff in here that you would expect out of a mummy story, like them exploring the pyramids, and it just feels kind of cliche and just boring and meandering for like the majority of this book. And then the final act is pretty cool. There's some pretty crazy and intense stuff that happens at the end of this book. So it does get pretty good towards the end, but it just takes so long to get there. And overall, this book just leaves me feeling kind of whatever about it. Yeah, it's not bad, but it's not great either. Like a 2.5 out of 5 stars for The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. Comes in at number 9 on my ranking. Okay. Just barely above that, coming in at number 8 is Return of the Mummy. This is the sequel, direct sequel, same characters and everything, and this is book number 23 in the original 62 series. And again, I kind of like skimmed through this one to like jog my memory on it because I didn't remember anything about this book. And I'm kind of torn on which one I like more, this or The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. I gave them both the same rating, 2.5 out of 5 stars. There are some things I like about this one a little bit more than the first book. This one feels a little bit more quickly paced. It gets to the action a little bit sooner. There's a decent like mystery in this book. And it just feels a little bit leaner and more well written, I think. But it doesn't have as satisfying as like a final act. Like the climax in The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb was a lot more intense, a lot darker, a lot creepier. This one just leaves me feeling, I don't know, a little bit indifferent by the end of it. Yeah, they're both kind of the same rating for me. I have a hard time deciding which one I like more, Return of the Mummy or Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. And at the end of the day, they're both just kind of okay to me. Far from being like some of my favorite Goosebumps books, but again, they're not terrible. I can understand if you like these books more than I do. Yeah, they're just not really for me. So yeah, Return of the Mummy comes in at number 8 on my ranking. Okay, let's see here. Okay, coming in at number 7, we have the Don't Wake Mummy episode. So this is an episode adaptation of the Don't Wake Mummy short story, which we will talk about soon enough. And it's pretty decent. It's not like one of my top favorite episodes of the Goosebumps TV show, but it is significantly better than Return of the Mummy, whereas Return of the Mummy's episode, again, kind of going along the same route as the books. It feels very cliche. It's like what you would expect out of a mummy story where they go to Egypt, they explore the pyramids, the mummies come to life. It's just all very generic and kind of stereotypical. But the Don't Wake Mummy episode has, I think, a more unique plot to it, to where, I'm forgetting the fine details even though I just watched this, but basically they have like this coffin brought into their house and it's in the basement. And I don't know if their father is like a historian or archaeologist or how he gets a hold of this mummy, but they have this mummy in the basement and it comes to life. And yeah, there's basically a killer mummy on the loose in their household, which I think is kind of fun and a little bit more of a unique setup for a mummy story. And it's not as good as the short story, obviously, since we haven't talked about it yet, but I think it's decent for what it is. The episode's not bad. Let's see, I gave the Don't Wake Mummy episode I didn't put a rating next to it. It's like a 2.75, like flat 3 stars, somewhere around there. So yeah, Don't Wake Mummy episode, it's fine, decent. Comes in at number 7 on my ranking. So yeah. Okay, we're starting to get into like the good territory now. Those ones were like okay, decent. From here on out, these are like good and up. So coming in at number 6 is The Mummy Walks. This is book number 16 in Series 2000. And this one also has a bit more of a unique plot to it. It's a bit different and more refreshing among the Mummy books within this franchise. And it is very crazy too. The one thing that I remember most about this book and that I'll probably never forget is the gunfight scene. Yes, there is quite a significant scene that happens in this book later on in the story where there are basically these like Egyptian soldiers fighting in one another, and they are using weapons, and it is pretty violent and intense and crazy. So yeah, this one is definitely one of the more far-fetched mummy stories, and I kind of like it for that reason, but at the same time, this one just does have a few flaws to it, and it's never been a book that I've like loved or anything. I gave it, let me see, a 3.25 out of 5. I think it's good. It's a fun book. It's crazy. But yeah, it's just not quite one of my top favorites. It does have pretty cool cover art, though. All the Series 2000 books have really cool covers. So yeah, that's The Mummy Walks. Comes in at number 6 on my ranking. Okay, coming in at number 5 on my ranking is Night of the Living Mummy. This is book number 3 in House of Shivers. This book just came out a few days ago, and I just got done reading it a couple of days ago. And I have to say, I'm quite impressed with this book. I also gave it a 3.25 out of 5, which isn't really like a super high score or anything, but that's still a good rating for me. Anything like 3 stars and above is positive leaning. That means I liked it. You know, it's not great, obviously, but I liked it. I think it was pretty good. And yeah, this book, it impressed me. I enjoyed this for the most part. This one has like some fantasy elements to it a little bit, some magical stuff. There's a little bit of like time travel going on here. And we also get some flashbacks. We follow another character in this book besides our main character, who was a young boy back in like the Egyptian times, and his father died in battle or war or something, I don't remember. And basically this young boy is made king of Egypt, and he is trying to cope with becoming king and learning how to run Egypt, I guess. And I really like these sections that take place back in Egypt following him and his life. To me, that was the most interesting and best part of this book. There was some pretty dark and gnarly stuff that happens back in Egypt. And R.L. Stine does a pretty good job too, I think, of writing about like that timeline and setting. I don't know how historically accurate it is. Probably not the most accurate, but I enjoyed reading that about that setting. It felt very believable to me. And this book also had a lot of nice humor to it, which I wasn't expecting. It got me to chuckle a few times. There's just some little jokes and stuff here and there. And this just felt like a very fun book. And it does have some dark stuff to it. This one just had a good balance between like horror and humor, in my opinion, even though it really wasn't all that scary. This one feels more like an adventure type story with a little bit of fantasy to it. It has some elements that of like Head You Lose and Night in Terror Tower, where a character, there's like some time travel stuff. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's some time travel elements involved, and our main character is kind of like on a scavenger hunt looking for a certain item. So it kind of reminds me of like Terror Tower, Head You Lose in that regard. But yeah, this was a pretty fun book. The ending was decent. It didn't have like a huge twist to it, which I thought was kind of refreshing. Not every book needs this big twist ending that like just completely changes the whole story. I'm not always really into that. I think R.L. Stine needs to like chill out a little bit when it gets to like the ending of the book sometimes. And this one, it kind of has that. There's a little bit of a weird twist involved, but it's not really like that detrimental to the story in my opinion. The final act was slightly rushed. It wasn't the most satisfying thing ever, but yeah, it was fine for what it is. So yeah, this book got a 3.25 out of 5. And honestly, I think this book is in contest with Scariest Book Ever as my favorite House of Shivers book so far. We're only 3 books in, so after this series is done with in the future and I read through all of these and rate them, you know, I might reevaluate them a little bit. And I did give Scariest Book Ever a higher score initially. I can't remember if I think I gave that one like a 3.5 or 3.75, but I don't know. I really enjoyed this one, even though I only gave it a 3.25 out of 5. It still comes in at number 5 on my ranking, so yeah, that's pretty good. That's Night of the Living Mummy. Okay, one other thing too I do want to mention before I continue, and I know I say this in all of my rankings, but it is very difficult for me to decide between these books. A lot of these, as you'll see here, have very similar or the same ratings, and yeah, I have a hard time deciding between these books, so yeah. Coming in at number 4 is The Dummy Meets the Mummy, book number 8 in the Slappy World series. And I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And even though I gave it like a slightly higher rating and it's above Night of the Living Mummy, as well as the next couple books I'll be talking about, I don't know, on a different day, if I were to go back and reread some of these, maybe I would switch them around a little bit. I don't know. I just decided to go with this ranking for the sake of this video. But yeah, this one comes in at number 4. And I really enjoyed this book. This one was a big surprise. I did not really go into this expecting anything great, especially with how the quality of Slappy World series tends to be. You know, it's not a great series, that's for sure. Far from one of my favorites, but this one is just a lot of fun. Reminds me of like an old Universal Monsters movie where like you have the Wolfman fighting Dracula or Frankenstein. This reminds me of one of those old Universal Monster movies. I don't know if that's what Stein was going for with this, But this book is just a lot of fun, cheesy monster action. It's pretty much what you would expect out of the title. It's the dummy and the mummy just duking it out. And it is so much more fun than you might think it would be. This is just a very entertaining book. It's hilarious. It's more one that you don't take as seriously, I think. But yeah, it's just a really fun book. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Dummy Meets the Mummy comes in at number 4 on my ranking. Okay, coming in at number 3, and again, I don't know if I necessarily like this one better than the previous books I talked about, but it also gets a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and coming in at number 3 is Diary of a Mad Mummy. Now, I've talked about this book before on my channel. This book, for me, is more nostalgic than anything else. This was like my very first Goosebumps book I ever read. My mom found a copy of this at a garage sale for me, and I read this book like 1,000 times. Like, it was the only one I had at the time, so yeah, I just kept reading it over and over again, and I just thought it was like the coolest thing ever. Like, I was mind blown. It was my first Choose Your Own Adventure book, I think, and yeah, I was just obsessed with it. And I did reread it, I think, last year when I did my GYG ranking, and it still holds up fairly well. I don't love it quite as much as I used to, but this is also kind of a fun book, and also with this being a Give Yourself Goosebumps book, it is kind of hard to compare it to like Goosebumps novels. The GYGs are just so much different. There's a lot of variety in these books, and over 20 different endings, so many different paths and different things that can happen. But yeah, this is a pretty good book. 3.5 out of 5 stars. Yeah, that's Diary of a Mad Mummy. Comes in at number 3 on my ranking. All right, we are on to the top 2, and these top 2 are like great, like very good territory. So the first one coming in at number 2 is Who's Your Mummy, part of the Goosebumps Horrorland series. Let me see, book number 6. And honestly, I'm kind of surprised that a Goosebumps Horrorland book made it this high up on the list, because again, the Horrorland series is not one of my favorite series in the franchise. All right, we'll just say that. But this book, I think, ended up being like my favorite one of the entire series. This book is just so darn cool, and it's very unique, kind of like The Mummy Walks. It's a little bit more far-fetched and more of a unique idea. The kids don't go to Egypt in this one. There's no pyramid exploration. This one doesn't really have any of like the typical things you would expect to find in like a mummy type story. It's basically about these kids that I think are visiting their uncle or some relative who is kind of obsessed with like mummies and Egyptian history and all of that stuff. And he has like these mummies in his cellar, in his basement. And this one is hard to talk about without spoiling anything, but there's a big twist and revelation about who their uncle is exactly and what he's doing with these mummies. And I'll just say that things get pretty gnarly. There's some pretty gruesome and violent stuff in here. This is like one of the most violent modern Goosebumps books that I've read. Some descriptions of blood and gore in this book. And it is epic. I loved every minute of it. This book was so much fun. And it also has a really cool twist ending too, that has like some emotional stuff to it. With the characters, you actually care about the characters a little bit in here, which I like. And yeah, this book is awesome. I also gave this one like a 3.5, but honestly, I think this is more like a 3.75 out of 5. My main negative with this book is the same negative I have with a lot of the Goosebumps Horrorland books, is it's too short. The main story of this book is only like 90 pages, while the Horrorland section, part of the Horrorland arc, takes up like 30 pages of the book. And you really notice a difference with these main stories being like 30 pages shorter than your typical Goosebumps book. It really hurts the story. I think this might be like one of my all-time favorite Goosebumps books if it was longer, more fleshed out, and the idea executed a little bit better. But yeah, Who's Your Mummy comes in at number 2 on my ranking. I absolutely love this book. I think it's pretty great. And yeah, Who's Your Mummy? Okay, coming in at number 1 is the Don't Wake Mummy short story from Even More Tales to Give You Goosebumps. This is the 3rd book in the Tales to Give You Goosebumps series, and Don't Wake Mummy is the 3rd short story in here, and I absolutely love this short story. This is, of course, the short story that they based the TV episode on, but the story is so much better. It is borderline flawless, in my opinion. I originally gave it like a 5 stars, 5 out of 5, but I decided to lower it a little bit because I did reread it somewhat recently. And I don't think it's quite like perfect or like one of my or like my top favorite short story in all of these Tales books. I think there's a few I like a little bit more. So I decided to lower it to like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the rating is padded a little bit. I mean, I am taking into account that it's a short story and it's kind of hard to compare it to like a full length novel. So I'm taking into account that it's shorter. You're not going to have all the room for the character development or the more intricate plotting and all of the fine details. So the rating is like a little bit padded. But I do think that this is the most solid and well put together mummy story. And yeah, it's just got such a unique plot to it to where you have the mummy basically invading these people's homes. There's a little bit of like pranks and shenanigans involved. And then it turns out that the mummy is actually alive. And it also has a very dark twist ending, which I really like. I don't want to spoil it exactly, but I really like the note that this short story ends on. It is just so good and super just ominous and creepy. I love it. So yeah, the Don't Wake Mummy short story from the third book in the Tales to Give You Goosebumps series is my absolute favorite mummy story in the Goosebumps franchise. Okay, that is my ranking of all the mummy stories in the franchise. Let me know what your thoughts are on these down below. Once again, I think R.L. Stine does a pretty good job with these. Very consistent. Again, the only bad one being like the Return of the Mummy episode, but I think the rest of them are at least like okay, decent, all the way up to like good, very good. So yeah, that's it, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.